I might get started with a bit of the housekeeping and welcome, and then I'm sure we'll have lots of people joining us in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So for those of you that have joined, my name's Diana. So I'm a nutritionist for little Étoile. I'm also a mum of 2-year-old twins. We are going to actually extend the Q&A time today for an extra 15 minutes. We had so many great questions coming through last week that we've decided to extend that for an extra 15 minutes. Any questions that you've got for Melanie, just pop them in the question chat box and we'll go through all of the questions at the end. And if you do need to jump off before we finish up, we will be recording the session and we'll pop the recording up to the Facebook group like we did last time. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Melanie, who is an expert prenatal and infant dietitian. Over to you, Melanie.
Thank you so much, Diana, and hello to everybody. I'm keen, first of all, to know if you guys can jump in the chat for me and let me know if you tried anything new since last week. Have you maybe introduced a solid to your little one for the first time? Have you tried a new solid that they haven't tried before? Just how has your week been when it comes to feeding your little one? Maybe you haven't tried your little one with a solid yet, but maybe you have gone and bought him or her a new high chair or some smocks like we were talking about, or something along those lines. So I'd love to hear in the chat what you've done. And if this is your first time, extra special welcome to you. And maybe just let me know where you are at in terms of feeding your little one. How old is your little one? And yeah, have you already started feeding solids or not? So while you guys are, Ash says that she got a high chair. Well done, Ash. It's a fun investment, isn't it? One thing I found with a high chair is, for those of you who haven't got a high chair yet, I got one that really was convertible for all ages. So it had all of the headrest around it and everything for when my little one was quite young, and then we were able to actually reduce the height of it and turn it just into a little chair for when she was actually ready just to sit at her own little table. So it was actually quite a good high chair. And Charlotte is using the bumbo instead of a high chair. Yep, and that's a really good idea too, Charlotte. So it's all about just what works for you, which is fantastic. So this week we're going to be talking about what should we feed our bubbas. And so first of all, I just wanted to talk about the 3 main approaches to introducing solids. So the first one is typically known by healthcare professionals as complementary feeding. So you might also just know that as spoon feeding. And it's the most common type of strategy for introducing solids. When it comes to complementary feeding, the reason it's called complementary is that it's complementary to feeding your baby breast milk or formula. So the majority of their nutrition is still coming from either breast milk or formula, and then your baby's just getting a little bit of spoon feeding to help them to get used to different flavors and textures and experience eating. So that's spoon feeding. And then the next type is called baby-led weaning. Now, baby-led weaning is certainly growing in popularity, and it's really all about allowing your baby to choose which foods they want to eat, as opposed to you actually dictating, because you're putting the food on the spoon. So your little one can actually go, oh, okay, I'm going to have some of this. So that it tends to be very much self-feeding. So it's done by providing a choice of different foods all at once, whether you have a little plate with different compartments on that plate, or whether you just put it on the tray of their high chair, or whether you put it on a plate, and then they can choose what they would like. So they might go, okay, well, I'm going to have a little bit of cooked carrot, and then I'm going to have a little bit of toast, and then I'm going to have a mouthful of cooked salmon, and so forth and so forth. So they're just picking as they want to, and they might some days leave. So you might have some grated apple there, and they might say, okay, well, I'm not going to have any grated apple today, but then next time they want to. And then the third option is combination feeding, which is obviously a combination of both spoon feeding and baby-led weaning. So I personally did a combination, like the combination option, and I think probably most people will tend to do that, whether they intentionally do so or not. And so there's no right or wrong. It's about choosing what's right for your baby. With baby-led weaning, obviously, if you're talking about foods that your bubba can pick up themselves, it tends to be more so little pieces of food. So they're not having as much of the spoon feeding puree stage. So if you are missing out on that spoon feeding puree stage and they're going straight to the baby-led weaning where they're choosing their own foods, probably the greatest risk with that is that little ones tend to having more solid food. So as you move up to more solid foods, they tend to gag a little bit more. Now, it's really important to understand the difference between gagging and choking. So gagging is literally when they are just doing a gag. So and they might spit out some food. They might cough a bit, and splutter a little bit. And babies do tend to do that. Choking is obviously where they are going blue in the face and they can't breathe, and that's when you definitely need to call for some immediate help. So babies do tend to have quite a good gag reflex. They are learning to eat, so this is all new for them. But at the same time, we do need to make sure that they are safe, and it's good to have those emergency phone numbers on hand for if you ever do need them. Now, it's interesting to note that, as I was saying, babies who go through the baby-led weaning, they tend to, because they're having more solid food at a slightly earlier age, they will gag at that stage. But the research also shows that when you are transitioning spoon feeding or complementary fed babies from those more pureed stages, and when you get them onto the more solid foods, even though it's going to be a little bit later on and they'll be a little bit older, the research suggests that they do still tend to gag as much. So yeah, it's like I said, it's really working out what you feel comfortable with and what's going to best suit your bubba. So if anybody has any questions about that, please yell out, but hopefully that makes it a little bit clearer for you. And the other thing I will say about it is that just because you choose to do baby-led weaning, it doesn't mean that you can't have some pouches of puree food on hand. I know that's certainly what I did, was that I started off with puree just for quite a short period of time. Then I progressed through quite quickly to baby-led weaning because I was quite confident in doing so, I guess being a dietitian. But then when I was going out and about, then I would often revert back to purees just because it was often easier when we were out socially. And I'm just seeing a question pop up, so I'm just going to have a look at that. So this question is, how can I wean overnight feeds? So great question. The first thing is just about making a decision, and I guess this is probably one of those questions where I'll get you to pop it in the Facebook group so that we can chat a little bit more about it, because I've got more questions back to you. Because the first being, what times, is your baby feeding on demand? Is your baby feeding a schedule overnight? How regular are those feeds? So you can do things like just choosing to and just giving your baby some water instead if they're waking up, or giving them a cuddle instead, and just not giving them the milk. So just making that decision not to do that. But you usually have to have a bit of a look in terms of timing for them. Alrighty, so if you are going to be doing traditional spoon feeding or complementary feeding, I'll talk you through the most common stages. So usually you start off with Silky Smooth. So Silky Smooth is obviously, so you're not replacing breast milk or formula, because as I said, that is where they're still getting most of their nutrition from, but that's really the type of texture that you're looking for. You're looking for that almost liquid texture, so that you're giving your little one different flavors to get used to, but you're starting off with a really smooth texture. And something along those lines of that silky smooth texture, you can really be quite confident of the safety of giving that to your baby in terms of texture, because if they're not gagging on breast milk or formula, then they're not going to be gagging on a silky smooth type of texture either. So for the parents out there who are feeling a bit nervous about starting their baby on solids, that can be a really great way to start as well. So this is usually from around 4 to 6 months of age. And remember, we were saying last week that when you shift up to that next stage really depends upon the development of your baby. So if your baby was born a bit prem, you need to take that into consideration as well. And so you really just need to be looking at how well your baby is holding their head up, how well they're sitting up, and how they go tolerating these different types of textures. So it's a little bit of trial and error. So usually around 4 to 6 months is your silky smooth stage. Some foods that you might like to include in there are things like an iron fortified cereal, and again, I would tend to either make this with some expressed breast milk. So you have the cereal and then mix it up and make it really sloppy with some expressed breast milk or some formula. And like I said, just make it really sloppy. If you are doing pureed meat at this stage, you'll need to add a lot of liquid to make it really sloppy. So it can be a bit tricky at that silky smooth stage, but it is possible. And then you can also do some legumes are fantastic, because in a minute we'll talk about iron-rich foods, but they're a great choice for making them really nice and sloppy. And again, you want to be adding some type of liquid to them to make them nice and sloppy in that early stage. So you might use something like a passata to make them nice and sloppy. So there's some really good options. And then, of course, your pureed veggies. And again, sometimes you might need to add a little bit of formula or a little bit of milk just to make them sloppy enough. Then from 6 to 8 months is when you're really looking at that lumpy, mushy stage. So at least by that age, you want to be making sure that they are having a few lumps, because you want them to learn how to chew and how to have those different textures in their mouth. And so they're really important for your baby's development at that stage. And so that's things like more of a mincemeat is a good choice. And things like some mashed broccoli, mashed potato, some choices along those lines can be really good too. And then also some of your mashed fruits too can be really good choices there. And then from 8 to 10 months, even if you are doing the complementary feeding option, that's really when you get onto your finger foods. And I'm going to show you, let's have a look at these questions, but I'm going to show you a guide to finger foods just in 1 second after we have a look at these questions. So Ash says, if baby doesn't like a particular puree, would I just move on and try it again another day? Yes, absolutely. So just like we feel like some foods on some days and not on other days, your baby will as well. For those of you who were here last week, you remember that I was saying that I've got a little 2-year-old. And so she's obviously a bit older than most of your babies, but I was just thinking yesterday, like it was only 2 weeks ago where she decided she didn't like tomatoes anymore, even though she used to love tomatoes. And she just wouldn't eat a tomato. And then just this week is her tomato week. Like it's her favorite food all of a sudden, and all she wants to do is eat tomatoes. And so, they just go through different preferences the same way that we do. And that's okay. So, just try again like, don't force it, and try again another day is the best option. So Natalia says, if my baby is breastfed on demand, should I offer solids at specific regular times, or feed depending upon my breastfeeding timing? It's up to you, Natalia. I would probably, like, it depends a bit on your baby's age as well. So if your baby is under 9 months, or is that you just commenting there? No. If your baby's under 9 months, then I would give solids with the breast milk, so after the breast milk. But if your baby is older than that, then I'd be starting to get into a bit of a routine in terms of the timing of their meals. And Monique has just asked a great question. She says, do we need to offer cool boiled water when giving solids? Yes, I would absolutely encourage you to do that. It's a really good habit for your little one to get into. Okay, so let me bring up, I'm just going to share my screen now. Oh, sorry, Diana, it says that you've disabled participant screen sharing. So just wondering if you could give me access to that, please.
Sorry. Yep, let me have a look.
While you're doing that, I'm just going to ask a question.
I hope this is easy to do.
Natalia says, can I mix, actually I'll come back to that question, Natalia. So Chloe says, is it better to offer savoury before sweeter options, i.e. veggies over more fruit-based? Yeah, yes, definitely. And we will get to that in just a minute as well, Chloe, but yes is the short answer. And how many mils of water do we have to give to an 8-month-old baby apart from exclusive breastfeeding? So at 8 months, I wouldn't worry so much about how much they're actually drinking unless your baby is constipated. So I just focus on offering it and just ensure that they're having a few sips and rinsing their mouth out, because again, they're going to be getting most of their fluids from breast milk at that age. And so the key goal is just about getting into the habit of finishing off a meal by rinsing out their mouth. Also good for when they start to develop their little teeth as well. Rinsing out their mouth with that cooled boiled water. Okay, so let's try and share my screen now. This is what I wanted to show you. So this is the little Étoile baby-led weaning, so soft finger foods, and this is in the Facebook group. So you can all have a look at it in your own time in the Facebook group. But you'll see here it talks about the recommended portion size of your finger foods for either baby-led weaning, or if you are doing that traditional complementary weaning, when they get onto the finger food stage. So you can see here that it's about 5 to 6 centimetres long. Oh, you can't see my little pointer. Just do a little pointer here. Yeah. There we go. So you can see here about 5 to 6 centimetres long. And you want it to be small, about the size where they can close their little hand around it, and so that they can hold it with just a little bit sticking over the edge, so that they can chomp, 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 like that. Now there's some really great suggestions here for types of foods that you can introduce as well. So here we've got the soft raw fruits, bananas, strawberries, slices of mango, watermelon slices. They love papaya wedges and avocado wedges. You've got your cooked fruits and veggies, so like cooked apple slices, wedges of pumpkin, some cauliflower florets with a little stem, so again, so it makes it easier for them to hold on to. Slices of pear, cooked carrot, sweet potato wedges, and again, the broccoli florets. And then some other things that you might like to try as well. So little fingers of toast. And again, don't feel bad about, like, there's no reason why you have to give them white bread. They can start off with wholemeal bread. And as soon as you feel confident, moving on to a multigrain, but usually a a whole meal is going to be your safest and healthiest option in terms of toast. Now, again, in terms of just the order of choking, they're much less likely to choke or gag, they're much less likely to gag on toast than they are on bread. So I'd recommend trying toasted fingers before trying bread. Little pieces of chicken, boiled eggs, which are then cut into quarters, cheese sticks, pieces of fish or tuna, again, obviously cooked. So if it's tin tuna, that doesn't have to be heated or cooked. But if it's something like some salmon steak, then just make sure that's cooked. And then also the little penne or spiral or bow-shaped pastas are fantastic as well. So there's some really great food suggestions for getting started when your baby gets to that finger food stage. Okay, so I'm just going to come back here for a minute. So much that I want to tell you. Okay, I jumped ahead because I was just so excited and getting into it all before, but one of the things that I did want to mention is that I was wondering whether you guys have heard of what's called the first 1,000 days. So the first 1,000 days is a period of time that looks at fertility and pregnancy and then introducing solids. So from conception or even just before conception up until about the age of 2. And during this period of time is when most of the genetic programming for your baby occurs. So even though your baby will have you and your partner's genes, those genes are actually programmed through the environment. So things like how many cuddles you're giving your baby and the good bacteria that you're giving to your baby and that other people are giving to your baby by hugs and kisses, by being around pets, good nutrition, obviously, the music that they listen to, all of these things in their environment impacts upon your baby's genetic programming. And one of the, obviously one of the most important parts of baby's development at that age is their brain. And I really wanted to also just show you this photograph that had a real impact on me as a mother, which shows, so I'll just show you here, baby's brain development. So you can see here, I'll just get my little pointer here again. So you can see here the neurons in a baby's brain and the little synapses that connect them. So this is at a newborn age. Then we move up to 1 month and you can see just how quickly, like what a transformation just in that first month of life, how many more neurons and connections there are. And this is just showing all of that knowledge that, that your baby is taking in. Then you can see the transformation from 1 month to 9 months, again, is just incredible. And then again, up to 2 years. So yeah, just to summarize, our baby's brains grow 80% during the first 18 months of life. So it is such an important time. I'll just get rid of this now. There we go. And so what do we need in terms of our baby's brain development in terms of nutrition and introducing solids? Well, again, this is where having those different textures, whether it be through your baby playing with the food or eating it in the mouth, getting used to and learning how to chew on their food, and then also having those different tastes and textures. So all of these types of environmental inputs are helping your baby's brain development. And then on top of that is, of course, the nutrition that your baby is getting from those foods. So with all of that in mind, what we want to be doing is trying to offer as much variety as we can. And next week, we're going to talk a little bit, we'll talk about allergens and just putting that into some perspective as well. But yeah, once your baby gets past those first months, and you know that your baby can tolerate all of the different allergens, then what we want to be doing is really encouraging your baby to have as much variety in terms of tastes and textures as you can, because that's just going to help their little brain development. So the last thing that I was just wanting to go through before I go into some more questions is key nutrients for babies. So again, up until we do the switch, so when we're doing the complementary feeding, so up until that 9 months where breast milk or formula, the majority of your baby's nutritional intake, then you don't need to worry too much about most nutrients because, as I said, your baby will be getting most of their nutrition from breast milk or formula. The number one most important nutrient during that time is iron, because it's really difficult for little ones to get enough iron. So we'll talk about some iron-rich foods in a minute. Some other nutrients that you may like to consider, though, are also zinc, vitamin D, omega-3, and iodine. Now, the nutrients that you get, or that your baby will get from iron, the foods that your baby gets iron from, as long as your baby is getting it from food and not from supplements, they will also get they'll also get zinc from most of those foods. Vitamin D, obviously the best source of vitamin D is sunlight. So if you live in an area where your baby isn't exposed to very much sunlight, and maybe and particularly if you haven't been exposed to very much sunlight, it's worth you having a look at finding out what your iron levels were. If you personally have low iron levels and you breastfed, then you may want to look at some supplementation in terms of vitamin D for your baby. Omega-3, again, if you're predominantly breastfeeding or formula feeding, then your baby is probably getting enough omega-3 from your diet through. So omega-3 does transfer quite well from breast milk over to your baby. So if you're having enough omega-3 in your diet, which is mainly fish, then and you're breastfeeding, then you can be confident that your baby is getting enough. If you're formula feeding, then you just want to check that the formula that you're using has adequate amounts of omega-3 in it. If it doesn't, then you may want to consider thinking about some omega-3 rich foods when you're introducing solids to your little one, or else possibly some omega-3 supplementation. And then the last one was iodine. So again, iodine will transport from your breast milk through to your baby. If your baby is on formula, then they'll get enough iodine through that. But if you're depleting iodine and you're breastfeeding, then that's where your baby may be at risk of not getting enough iodine. So just a few key nutrients to think about there. But like I said, the most important nutrient when we're thinking about introducing solids is iron. So where do we get iron from for our little ones? Well, most people, when they think of iron, they think of red meat. And red meat certainly is a good source of iron, but it's definitely not the only source. And to put it into perspective for you, because we as women need a lot more iron than obviously our little ones do, I think this gives a really good example though. So men require 8 milligrams of iron per day. Women who are getting their periods and so therefore losing iron through their bleeding each month need 18 milligrams of iron. And then during pregnancy, we need 27 milligrams, so much higher again. Now, a serving of red meat, so 100-gram serving, has about 3 milligrams of iron in it. So you can see that you have to eat an awful lot of red meat to meet your iron requirements, which is why many women do need some additional assistance, particularly during pregnancy. So where do we get the rest of our iron from? Well, we actually get it from a really diverse diet. And so there's actually iron in not just red meat, but also in your other types of protein foods, such as your chicken and fish and eggs all contain iron. Your vegetarian proteins as well, so tofu and legumes are also sources of iron, and eggs. And then also whole grains. So we were talking before about wholemeal bread rather than white bread. Wholemeal bread has got double the amount of iron than white bread does. Same with brown rice, it's got double the amount of white rice. So getting your baby started on those wholemeal versions of foods can be a really good idea as well. I would recommend using a specifically tailored iron fortified cereal for your little one if you're going to be starting them on a cereal. And then also your vegetables. So green leafy vegetables in particular also contain iron. And even some dairy contains a bit of iron. So the main thing that doesn't contain iron is fruit. Not that that's bad for your baby at all, but this is why we want to be focusing on vegetables in particular. And then, of course, things like sugary foods and treat foods don't contain any iron. So again, we're wanting to limit those types of foods. So it's really about having that diverse diet and introducing your baby to a range of those really nutritious foods. Okay, I think that was the key things that I was wanting to go through. So I'm going to have a look now because I know we've got a whole lot of questions, and it was great chatting to you guys about all of your questions last week. Have I got time for questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. I just wanted to jump on and say that those of you asking questions, please put in your first and last name so that I can look you up and we can send you out your Little Étoile prize packs. And if you've already asked a question, just jump on and put in your full name. You don't need to ask the question again, just put your name in. That's it. So yeah, over to the questions.
Great. Okie dokie. So Charlotte says, how old to offer cool boiled water with food? My son is 5 months and been on solids for 2 weeks now, but I don't want to give water in place of formula. Great question, Charlotte. So you can definitely start the cool boiled water now, but not in place of the formula. So this is where you give formula to your baby first because your son, because he is only 5 months of age. So this is why you give him formula first, and then you give him his solid food and a bit of cooled boiled water as a top up. So that won't replace his formula because he's filling up his tummy on the formula first. Then it's like, you know how we always say, you go out to a restaurant and you go, I'm so full. And then they offer dessert and you go, they could probably sneak a little bit down the sides. That's what it's like for your baby. They get full up on breast milk or formula, and then they're like, oh, well, this looks interesting. You're giving me some beautiful pureed pear. Well, I haven't had that before. I'm going to have a try of this, and I'll get a little bit down the side. So that's what it's like for them. So you're not going to replace his formula. It'll just be getting them used to that taste afterwards. Okie dokie. So now let's go over here to these questions. Okay, so Melinda says, when giving water, what's the best type, bottle or cup? Yeah, so I would recommend cups. And there's no, the ideal is to make sure that it's BPA free, so that it doesn't have any of the plastics which can cause them problems. And a lot of mums just use the cups with the little straws these days. So there's no reason why you can't move on to that, or just use straight away a little plastic cup for them to just take a little sip out of is fine too, but just again ensuring that it's BPA free. Yeah, so at this stage any of those are going to be fine for you, Melinda. The key part, from my perspective, it's really about them learning. So I would encourage some type of cup rather than a bottle, though, in an ideal world. It's not going to hurt using a bottle, but it will be better in a cup. Okay, can we give nuts to a 12-month-old and how to introduce them? Great question. So yes and no. So you can give a nut butter, but I wouldn't give nuts per se. So again, my daughter is 2 and I still don't give her nuts to eat because they are hard and so they are quite a choking risk. And so even though I do give her grains, like a multi-grain bread or something along those lines and things like that, I obviously didn't give her when she was younger. But yeah, nuts themselves, you do need to be a bit careful of because they really are quite a choking risk. How to introduce them, I would definitely start with a nut paste. And then once they get to a stage where you're really confident that they can eat foods without choking, then that's when you could move on to something like that. So for example, another food that you need to be really careful of them choking on is the little cherry tomatoes and grapes. So and that's because the skin around the outside can get stuck in their throat and they can choke on that. So the recommendations is always to cut them down into little tiny pieces that they're not going to choke on. And again, as they get older and as they get more confident and they stop choking, then you can sort of get onto those more like larger portions. And like I said, now I quite happily will give my daughter a whole cherry tomato to chomp on, but it's very rare that she'd actually be able to cut through it all with her teeth and be able to eat it as is. So that's why I wouldn't do nuts yet. So start with a nut paste is my short answer for you. You can also get like, you know, the LSA mixes that you put up on your cereal. So you could do something like that as well when they at 12 months would be fine. Mention babies being able to play with foods at the table even when they aren't eating. What sorts of foods would be best at 5 months? Yeah, really, anything. Like I would just give them whatever I was eating that night. So say I was doing some pasta, it might just be about having a bit of a play with that. I guess I'd be interested, Dominique, are you doing baby-led weaning or are you doing complementary? If you're doing complementary, then obviously they're doing pureed foods, so there's no reason why they can't even play with that pureed food. So for example, if you're giving them some pureed pumpkin, then that's a great fun food to put their fingers in and make a bit of a mess. And even though, yes, it's more work for us, just remembering that that's really good for your baby to be doing. Ash says, butter and Vegemite on toast or better just plain? Oh, great question, Ash. So there's certainly nothing wrong with putting spreads onto the toast. I think that's really quite a good idea. Instead of butter and Vegemite, though, I would tend to recommend things like some avocado spread on, or some hummus works really well as well, or even a bit of yogurt can work well too. The reason being that butter and Vegemite are quite salty, and particularly butter also has some of those unhealthy fats. So it's not bad for your baby. It's not going to be the end of the world if he or she is having butter and Vegemite, but there are just better options out there. And obviously staying away from honey until they're at least 1 though, due to the risk of the bacteria in there. So Evelyn says, when I give my baby of 9 months old a piece of food big enough for her to grab, I'm constantly worried that she will shock or she's not eating, but just leaking because she can't eat it. Do I need to have small pieces for her to be able to swallow? No, if they don't have to be small enough for her to be able to swallow, they just need to be soft enough, Evelyn. So I'd really encourage you, from what you've written, to have a look in the Facebook group at the soft finger foods guide that's in there. You'll need to scroll right back to the start of all the posts and find that, because I think for your little one, that will be some really good foods to start with. And yeah, like we do always need to supervise our little ones while they're eating, because there is, of course, always that risk. But the risk is rare, and the benefits of eating outweigh the risks. Yeah, so go for it. You'll be fine. But yeah, so it's good for her to practice foods that she can grab and hold in her hand, and to start learning to bite those. But like I said, just starting off with foods that are soft enough. Ash says, oh, good question, Ash. Any good recommendations or preferences for high pre and probiotic foods to introduce early? Great question. Okay, so for those who don't know, pre and probiotic foods are about optimizing your baby's microbiota. So all of their good bugs, basically. Which has a huge impact upon their lifelong health. And if anybody did any formula feeding, you'll often see these days marketing on the container about different pre and probiotics. So probiotics are an actual live strain of bacteria that they'll add to things like formula. They will also add different probiotic strains, like you can buy them as supplements. And there's also probiotic strains, like live bacteria, in foods like kombucha and kimchi and kefir, even yogurt, foods like that. So when it comes to probiotics, having those live strains of bacteria, yeah, so just trying to think. So yogurt is the obvious choice there for little ones, and a really good choice for them to have. You do need to be not careful, isn't the right word, because it's like a really nutritious food, but we just don't want that to be the only food that a baby is having, because of the fact that we still want them to get most of their dairy from their breast milk or formula, but they can definitely have some yogurt in terms of flavour and playing with that, and it's quite a silky smooth food, and something that they quite like. Get them straight onto a Greek yogurt, as opposed to getting them onto flavoured yogurts that have got added sugar and so forth. So they can handle a really tart Greek yogurt at that age. So start them off well. So you could also do some kimchi, which is some vegetables that are fermented, would also be an option. Now, in terms of prebiotics are foods that our bacteria like and that causes them to flourish, because they grow off those foods as well. So good prebiotic foods include foods like banana. So that's definitely a good choice for your little one, and you can even start with some mashed banana at that lumpy, mushy stage. So banana is a really good one. Onion and garlic are great, and so again, there's no reason that you can't start mixing some onion and garlic through your baby's foods once they get to that flavour combination stage. So we'll talk more next week about starting off with individual foods because of allergies, and then moving into more of a combination. So once you start combining, yeah, you can definitely add some garlic and onion, which are great prebiotics, and really great for your little one from that perspective. Yeah, basically any food that's got fibre in it is going to be a prebiotic as a general rule. So another great choice of prebiotic is sweet potato, and that works really well in that silky smooth stage as well, or the lumpy mushy stage. So again, just mushing something like that up. So lots of really great prebiotics to focus on, Ash. Ash also says, would you ever introduce cow's milk in the first year? Baby is breastfed. So no, there's not really any need to, because as you say, you're breastfeeding. So cool boiled water, and then just a little bit of yogurt occasionally is what I would focus on there, Ash. I'm just going to scroll down. Dominic, you've done a great question about food intolerances, but I'll encourage you to bring that question next week because that's when we're going to be talking about allergies. So here's a good question. Can we feed raw apple to a 12-month-old? Yes. Yeah. You do just need to be aware of your baby's choking abilities. So for some mums, they might feel more comfortable grating it for them. But for other babies, they've got their little teeth and are tolerating food quite well. Then, yeah, I know a lot of parents, myself included, who give raw apple to babies prior to 12 months of age. You may want to peel it for an extra layer of security, like an extra layer of safety. But yeah, that should be fine as long as your baby is feeding well. Should we see an immediate change in stools when introducing purees, or that happen later down the track when they eat more food over breast milk? Ash, we're going to talk more about poo next week, but yeah, it tends to happen more so. You do start to see a bit of a change as soon as you start introducing any solids, but it definitely tends to be more so down the track when they're eating more food. Melinda makes sourdough bread at home. Is that okay for babies? Good on you, Melinda. Yes, that's fine. Yeah, again, just make sure you're cutting it up in appropriate size pieces, your little one, and I'd start by toasting it. Chloe says, do we need to worry about ratios of fats to carbs to protein for little ones? No. You don't. And you're right, it is more focused on exposure. So particularly at that early age. In terms of, this is Australian guidelines, so they actually don't even have any dietary guidelines for little ones until the age of 2 in Australia. In terms of recommendations for portion sizes and so forth, because it is about just exposing them to all of those great nutritious foods. So no, you don't need to worry too much. I tended to, again, being a dietitian, tended to replicate just my meals. So obviously I was aware of the fact that I needed to be having 2 serves of fruit today, at least 5 serves of veggies, a couple of serves of protein-rich foods, at least kind of like more like 5 to 6 serves of whole grains. So my diet followed the portion sizes, and then for me, I just always got my little girl to eat basically a smaller, more pureed version of what I was eating, and so that way she was getting the right types of ratios anyway. But yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about that at this stage, Chloe. How long do you need to wait before introducing new foods? We'll talk about that next week, Anushka. And Dominique says, giving baby foods to play with and hold, should they be larger to avoid choking if they put it in their mouth? You mentioned pasta. I was thinking a combination feeding approach of baby-led and purees. Yeah, so essentially you want to be giving them the types of foods that you're comfortable for them to eat, or foods that's right, are much bigger than they're going to be able to get into their mouth. So for example, a whole banana, they're not going to be able to eat that. They're going to suck on it like a toy. Or a whole apple, again, they're going to just try and mouth it and suck on it like they would a toy. So I wouldn't have any problems with them kind of playing with those types of foods. Evelyn says the list, that there isn't any meat on that list, so I shouldn't try that because it's not soft enough. Evelyn, so no, you could, there's no reason why you can't try red meat for a little one. It's not as soft. And so it's more of a baby-led weaning approach, but I certainly know of parents who get their little ones to chew on something like a chop, like a lamb chop or something along those lines, right from a very young age, and they just kind of just chomp, 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 chomp. So yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't get a little one to do that. That'd be fine.
I think we've made it through the list, Melanie. I think you've got through all the questions.
I have over there. There's a few more in the chat group. If you want me to just do those ones.
Perfect. If you maybe just want to answer the last couple of questions, and then we'll finish up, and encourage everyone to pop any more questions in the Facebook group, and we'll have some discussions after.
Absolutely. Okay. So Monique says, what age do we give them yogurt? So Monique, in terms of the texture of yogurt, it's fine right from 4 to 6 months of age. So yeah, it's safe from that perspective. It can be one of the earlier foods. Like I said, it doesn't have a huge amount of iron in it, so you just wouldn't give them loads of it, but there's no reason why they can't start eating that. And then Charlotte says, are there any non-dairy probiotic foods for babies with cow's milk protein allergy? Probiotic foods. So I was talking before about the kimchi. You could do that. Sauerkraut would be another choice, but that's going to be a little bit more when they're a little bit older. So they would probably be some of the best choices there. All right, everybody. So that is the questions. Thank you so much for all of your engagement, and hopefully that has been helpful for you all.
That's awesome. Thanks, Melanie. That was amazing. All right, we'll finish up. See you guys.
See you all next week. Make sure you come back. I've got lots more to share. Bye.